Ann and Amy, but it's just Dan today. Amy will be back soon. She's just feeling a little under the weather and a little blue because her liberal friends are treating her poorly because that's what liberals do. They throw tantrums when they don't get their way. But she'll be okay. Now, the question turning to state of Illinois is will we be okay? Will the governor be okay now that a labor impasse has been formally declared between AFSCME, the state's largest public sector union, representing 37,000 state workers, and Governor Rauner? Where does this go from here? And let's just get a real handle on what AFSCME wants. Now, this in the context of, I believe, 19 other public sector collective bargaining units, unions that represent smaller groups of state employees, have taken a wage freeze. Rauner successfully negotiated contracts in his first 2 years. 19 other collective bargaining units. AFSCME, not so much. Here's where AFSCME starts. The median salary for the AFSCME member, $63,000. That's compared with $32,000 median salary in Illinois for private sector workers. AFSCME employees, state workers, will average $1.6 million in retirement benefits. Overtime benefits begin after working just 7.5 hours per day rather than after working 40 hours per week. 10 to 25 work days off per year for vacation, of which those that go unused can be cashed in for payment. 15 different types of work leave, including education leave for up to 2 years, leave for elective office, Peace Corps, Job Corps leave, all the while retaining and continuing to accumulate seniority, 12 days of sick leave, time off without loss to pay to investigate and process union grievances. Oh, and the deal that they want at present, that's where we're starting from right now. The deal they want at present has raises over the life of the contract between 15 and 29%. Is that what you're getting in the private sector? 4, 5, 6% bump per annum, compounded, starting with this salary and benefits package. So what is the governor to do? What are his options? For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Mailee Smith, who is a labor law expert for the Illinois Policy Institute. Mailee, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for having me.
So this kind of torturous process between the governor and AFSCME took a step yesterday when the labor board ruled that there is a formal impasse. So what does that mean, and what does that trigger?
Sure. It's a win for the state taxpayers. When AFSCME comes to the negotiating table, AFSCME likes to paint this picture that it's AFSCME versus the governor. But in reality, it's AFSCME versus the state taxpayers. And historically, the state taxpayers have had significantly less power than the union when it comes to negotiating. You know, the governor's predecessors were beholden to AFSCME for their elections. AFSCME contributes hundreds of thousands of dollars to state politicians. And then those politicians kowtow to AFSCME's demands, which is why you see all of those contract benefits that you just listed, why they have those benefits. And so, you know, as we look at what happened with the labor board, you know, we want to recognize that this is a win for the state taxpayers.
Okay, it's a win, but that may be short-lived if, depending on kind of the ultimate outcome of a contract that is or is not forged. And so the governor's options from this point forward.
Well, at this point, either party can appeal the board's decision. So obviously AFSCME has already vowed that they are going to take this appeal to the state courts. So AFSCME can try to get a stay or an injunction of the board's decision through the state courts. Rauner, in the meantime, he can implement his last and best offer to AFSCME. If Rauner does that, AFSCME can strike. So I realize this sounds like there's a lot of different things in play. There's a lot of different scenarios that could happen, and that's true. And you know, we're at a spot in these negotiations that the state has never been before. Everything that has happened since January of this year when the governor asked the board to declare an impasse is new. We have never been to this spot before with a government worker union.
And so, but just the specifics of that though. So Ronner's last best final offer he made to AFSCME, he could now impose, and they could while the AFSCME's appeal is pending, and they can decide whether they're going to take it or walk.
Right. AFSCME would, if the governor implements his last and best offer, AFSCME then has a decision to make. Are they going to accept that offer, or are they going to go on strike? Now, something that the state taxpayer should know is that there's no fear that they're in an AFSCME strike. I know that the state has already started developing contingency plans. The state can hire replacement workers. So state operations are going to continue. And other state workers, if there are peace officers or firefighters, Illinois law prevents those type of workers from going on strike. So the general health and safety of the people of the state is going to remain safe.
Okay, so he has that option now where we're getting to that moment in time, right, where decisions are going to be made if he has that option. Does he also have the option to lock them out at this point, if even prior to a potential decision on a strike?
Well, the parties had entered into 3 different tolling agreements, which are basically agreements that they're going to keep the contract in place until there is an impasse. That third tolling agreement, which was still in effect until impasse, declared that AFSCME wouldn't strike and the governor would not lock out. Now, arguably, that tolling agreement is now null and void because there has been an impasse declared. So can the governor lock workers out? Arguably, he can, but he has remained committed throughout negotiations to not locking out state workers. And really, at this point in time, it wouldn't make any sense. The labor board has agreed with the state that the parties are at impasse.
Right. So if the play, if he wanted to force the confrontation, essentially would be to just say, well, we're going to, my last best final offer is what it's going to be, and then you decide whether you want to take it or walk, and then we'll go from there.
Right.
So he could easily do that, right? And so just to be clear, too, I mean, based on the numbers that I set forward in the open, Governor Ronner has proposed to AFSCME a similar deal that he inked with all of those other collective bargaining units I mentioned, which includes a wage freeze, right?
Exactly. He has negotiated agreements with 19 other labor organizations, and those 19 other agreements had provisions that are significantly similar to what he is offering AFSCME, and that includes a wage freeze. It also includes things like merit pay. So the governor is offering to AFSCME, they will maintain their current salary levels. It's a temporary wage freeze. But he is also offering $200 million in additional compensation in the form of bonuses. Employees just have to meet simple, objective standards like not having unexcused absences, and they would be eligible for bonuses throughout each year throughout the term of the contract.
So that merit pay sweetener comes despite the fact that adjusted for cost of living, Illinois has the highest paid state workers in the nation, right?
That's right. So they will continue to maintain that high level of salary that makes them the highest paid state workers in the nation. And on top of that, they would be getting this additional compensation in the form of bonuses.
And if now the other option Ronner has, if he doesn't want to precipitate that moment, is to allow AFSCME's appeals to play themselves out. And, if he doesn't take the fight to them, as it were, then, does this just kind of go on in perpetuity, winding its way through multiple appeals?
Well, and that is what will likely happen. The AFSCME has said that they're going to appeal. As an attorney, what I assume and what I think is likely to happen is that AFSCME is going to argue and ask the state appellate court to basically put on hold the labor board's decision. That's a typical procedural move in litigation. And so what would happen generally is that court's going to say, okay, we see that lower court decision, but in this case, the board decision, we see that decision. We're going to just put that on hold
Okay.
Nobody does anything until we've decided whether or not that decision was correct.
Okay, but then after a state court rules on the matter, then that doesn't exhaust AFSCME's appeal, right? I mean, say they ruled
Right. They can take this to the state Supreme Court.
right, and then and in the interim, Ronner could be frozen from action if he doesn't act quickly because they could, as you say, kind of not set aside, but freeze everybody, allow the appeals to exhaust themselves, and then he goes to the Supreme Court, which is 4-3 Democrat. And we've seen the state Supreme Court's rulings on matters like pension reform. He could lose at that level, and then where do we stand, and what are the options?
Well, all of that depends on how these various courts frame their resolution. At this point in time, what would be on the table are the parties at impasse. That is what would be appealed by AFSCME.
If any court says they're not at impasse, then you're just back at the negotiating table.
Correct. Right.
And so I guess that's my point is, all you takes is one court to say no impasse, and then you're right back on the merry-go-round. You're right back to where we've been for the better part of a year.
Right. And so, I mean, the short answer to this is we are not going to see resolution for quite some time.
Unless Ronner wants to shoot the gap right now.
Right.
Interesting. Okay. She is Mailee Smith. She is a labor attorney, a labor law expert for the Illinois Policy Institute, illinoispolicy.org. Mailee, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And she joined us on the turnkey.pro answer line.